I woke up that morning with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation, my heart bouncing with the kind of excitement only graduation day can bring. Years of late nights, endless papers, and relentless exams had led to this moment, and I wanted to believe my parents would finally see me not just as their child, but as someone who had earned something remarkable. The sunlight spilling through my window seemed to promise hope, yet a familiar tight knot of unease settled in my stomach. Even as I dressed in my cap and gown, I couldn't shake the shadows of my family's favoritism. The way my sibling always seemed to be the golden child, praised for even the smallest accomplishments, while my own efforts were quietly ignored or dismissed. Memories of birthday parties overlooked, graduations celebrated only with perfunctory smiles, and whispered criticisms flashed through my mind, each one a subtle sting that had compounded over the years. My parents had always perfected the art of emotional distance, and though I craved their pride, I had learned to brace myself for disappointment. Walking into the hall, the smell of polished floors and fresh flowers mingled with the buzz of excitement from my peers. I clutched my diploma tightly, a small talisman of achievement in a world where acknowledgement from home was scarce. But as the ceremony began, I could see the faint smirks exchanged between my parents, a quiet arrogance that hinted at their own agenda. Then, as the principal announced my name, their expressions shifted. Out of nowhere, they handed me a thick envelope of Disownment papers, formally severing me from any familial connection. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I felt every eye fixated on me. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, the words inside cutting deeper than any grade, any insult, or any slight I had endured before. Pride and dread collided in my chest, leaving me frozen on stage, heart hammering, mind racing. The humiliation was immediate and searing, yet somewhere beneath it all, a spark of defiance ignited. I wasn't sure how this day would end, but one thing became painfully clear: everything had changed, and I would never be powerless again. I froze mid-step, the envelope trembling in my hands as whispers rippled through the hall. The world seemed to shrink, every pair of eyes boring into me, some curious, some sympathetic, others delighting in my parents' cruelty. My chest tightened, and a flush of humiliation burned across my face. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the polished floor beneath me, but I couldn't move. Memories of past graduations, birthdays, and family gatherings surged unbidden, each one a silent testament to the way I had always been overlooked. While my sibling received accolades and praise, I had learned to measure my worth in quiet accomplishments no one acknowledged. I remembered the way my achievements were dismissed, the way my opinions were ignored, and the subtle, constant messages that I was never enough. Yet amid the shock and pain, a tiny ember of defiance flickered. They didn't know who they were messing with. Even in that frozen, humiliating moment, I realized that their arrogance had blinded them to everything I had built quietly, unseen. The whispers of my classmates, some sympathetic, some scandalized, wrapped around me like a wave, both crushing and oddly empowering. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe, to remind myself that this wasn't the end of my story. Every sneer, every shock, every murmured comment only steeled my resolve. I wasn't powerless, not truly. And as I sat frozen, absorbing the sting of their betrayal, I understood that the humiliation I endured today would be the foundation for the triumph to come. As I sat there, frozen on stage, the initial sting of humiliation began to simmer into something sharper, more focused. My mind drifted away from the murmurs and sideways glances to the countless hours I had spent quietly building my life outside their narrow expectations. I had worked jobs they didn't know about, stayed late at internships, cultivated mentors and connections who believed in me when my own family rarely did. Every late night coding, networking, or learning a new skill suddenly felt like armor, a silent fortress they had never imagined. I reminded myself of the contracts I'd negotiated, the doors I opened, and the professional reputation I had quietly amassed, all without their recognition or approval. In my head, I ran through scenarios, imagining their faces when the consequences of my accomplishments became undeniable. They had always assumed I was powerless, underestimated me, dismissed me, but they had no idea how carefully I had been preparing. Confidence surged as I realized that humiliation was temporary, but power, real, unassailable power, was mine. Every setback they had imposed, every slight, every favoritism-driven dismissal, had become fuel. I wasn't just going to endure this. I was going to turn it into the ultimate reversal. The audience, the murmurs around me, the curious eyes of my classmates, all of them would witness the moment I transformed from the overlooked child into someone they couldn't ignore. And as that thought settled, I felt the first flicker of a plan forming, quiet yet inevitable, a subtle promise that the day's humiliation would be only the beginning of a reckoning they would never see coming. I slipped behind the curtain, my heart still pounding from the shock of the Disownment papers. The crowd's applause and whispers felt distant, muffled by the thick fabric separating me from the stage. My parents' smug expressions haunted me even in the shadowed backstage, their quiet gloating slicing through the tension. I paced in a tight circle, torn between confronting them immediately and waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Every instinct screamed for an instant confrontation, for verbal retaliation, but another, quieter voice reminded me that patience would serve me better. The humiliation had been public. The reversal needed to be more spectacular. I thought about the connections I'd cultivated, the career doors I had quietly opened, and the careful steps I had taken to build influence they would never suspect. My pulse raced as I weighed options, imagining every reaction and every consequence. And then, over the soft hum of backstage chatter, a voice boomed across the hall. The CEO's assistant was announcing the next name. Time seemed to stretch, each syllable echoing with the promise of revelation. My chest tightened, and my stomach lurched. The air grew heavy, anticipation coiling like a spring, because I knew this moment could change everything. One name, one announcement, and the balance of power would shift irrevocably. I held my breath, frozen, aware that what came next could either humiliate me further or set the stage for the ultimate reversal. The murmurs backstage quieted as the voice rang out, clear and authoritative, my name. For a moment, disbelief hit me like a punch to the chest. The CEO, the very figure I had quietly connected with over months of networking and late-night work, was calling me to the stage. My parents' smug smiles wavered, just slightly at first, but the tremor in their expressions grew with every passing second. I felt the weight of every slight, every overlooked achievement, and every whispered criticism build into a quiet, simmering satisfaction. The crowd's attention shifted toward me, eyes widening as recognition settled over them. My heartbeat thundered, not from fear, but from anticipation. As the reality of what was unfolding sank in, I walked forward with careful composure, each step measured, letting the tension stretch as long as possible. Their eyes darted from me to the envelope they had handed me moments ago, confusion and disbelief etching deeper into their faces. The whispers around me became audible, a low hum of surprise and intrigue. I could almost hear them thinking, how could this be? And it fueled me, stoking the quiet thrill of impending justice. Every movement I made carried the weight of months of preparation and silent victories. The CEO extended a hand, a nod of recognition that contrasted starkly with my parents' shock. Gasps and murmurs swelled across the hall, mixing with the applause that began to rise. I felt a wave of vindication as I accepted the award, internship, or scholarship, the ultimate symbol of the life they had dismissed. Their smug arrogance was fading fast, replaced by a stunned realization that they had underestimated me completely. In that moment, everything shifted, and I finally tasted the first, thrilling notes of the reversal that had been quietly building for years. I stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, as the applause and whispers swirled around me. My chest swelled not with fear, but with a quiet, burning triumph. I could feel every eye on me, the weight of their astonishment pressing in, and I let it fuel me. They thought this day would humiliate me, I reminded myself, but they never imagined I'd turn it into the stage of my victory. I smiled subtly, letting the recognition from the CEO wash over me. And for a fleeting second, I allowed the satisfaction of seeing my parents' rigid expressions falter to seep in. This is the payoff for every sneer, every comparison, every dismissive word, I thought, my internal voice steady and calm. As I shook the CEO's hand, I nodded and whispered my gratitude. The words polite, professional, but loaded with unspoken meaning. I could see my siblings shifting uncomfortably, my parents' mouths opening and closing without sound, their confidence crumbling in the face of a reality they had never prepared for. Each step back from the handshake felt like reclaiming a piece of power that had always been theirs to withhold. They underestimated me, I mused, and that was their greatest mistake. The murmurs of the audience became a chorus of validation, their palpable as I stood tall, holding my recognition like a quiet banner of victory. I allowed myself a moment to glance at the Disownment papers still clutched in my hand, a symbol of their attempt to control me, and felt the thrill of ironic satisfaction. Today, I was not just accepted, I was celebrated, elevated, and vindicated, and every silent observer felt the weight of the reversal as intensely as I did. The whole buzzed with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Voices rising in murmured astonishment as classmates whispered to each other, and faculty exchanged knowing glances. I could feel the energy shift palpably, the attention no longer on ceremony, but on the stunning reversal unfolding before them. My parents' faces were frozen in a storm of conflicting emotion, shock, shame, and an unmistakable sting of regret. The mother's hand trembled as she subconsciously clutched her purse, while my father's fingers fidgeted nervously with the Disownment papers he had so confidently handed me just moments ago. A sudden rustle of paper caught my attention. The envelope they had used to sever me from their lives was torn slightly, edges curling in their frantic, silent response. Even the small act of a handkerchief dropping from my mother's lap seemed magnified, a symbol of their unraveling composure. Each gesture, each faltering movement amplified the tension, making their disbelief almost tangible. Round me, classmates' eyes widened, some leaning forward, whispering, pointing subtly, yet unable to hide their admiration for the way I carried myself. The contrast between their faltering authority and my poised confidence could not have been more pronounced. I felt the energy of validation surge through me, a mix of vindication and empowerment that left me quietly satisfied. In that moment, the silence and murmurs, the gestures and glances, all told the same story. The tables had turned, and I stood unmistakably in the center of it. As the applause and whispers swirled around me, my mind drifted backward, threading together the months of quiet and celebrated effort that had led to this moment. I remembered the late nights I spent at internships, working without recognition, answering endless emails while my family dismissed my ambitions as trivial. Mentors who had believed in me when my parents rarely did, guiding me, introducing me to networks I had no right to expect, all played their part in this invisible scaffolding of success. I recalled the careful management of finances, the small savings accounts, investments, and strategic decisions that had quietly secured my independence. Every connection I had nurtured, every opportunity I had quietly seized, converged into this instant of undeniable recognition. The contrast was stark. Their smug assumptions of my weakness, their blind disregard for my resilience, against the visible, public validation I now held. Karma, long delayed, was finally asserting itself, and the satisfaction was almost intoxicating. I allowed myself a private smile, knowing that each unnoticed sacrifice, every dismissed achievement, had compounded into a reckoning far beyond their comprehension. This wasn't just a triumph. It was proof that quiet diligence, strategic persistence, and integrity could outshine arrogance and cruelty. The room round me seemed to pulse with the energy of that realization, each whisper and glance reinforcing that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. I stood there, not in anger, but in complete, unshakable satisfaction. Every effort, every hidden step, every unseen victory had led to this undeniable moment of karmic justice. Later, away from the crowd, I finally allowed myself to act on the quiet, simmering plan that had been forming for years. I could have confronted my parents immediately, but the moment called for precision, not impulse. Instead, I chose a subtle, surgical approach and elegantly worded message sent to both of them, copy-pasted to a small group of family friends who had always admired my siblings' achievements but had never recognized mine. Each carefully chosen word carried the weight of my accomplishments, the recognition I had earned, and the irony of their earlier actions. I detailed my acceptance, the CEO's acknowledgement, and hinted at the doors that now awaited me, all while noting, politely and pointedly, how surprised I imagined they must be. I watched their faces change, the initial flush of shock giving way to a deep, simmering shame, a helplessness they had rarely felt. My parents had spent a lifetime trying to assert control, but now the social currency had shifted. My status, previously dismissed, was visible, undeniable, and celebrated publicly. Their moral authority evaporated, replaced by the quiet sting of social humiliation. I felt no gloating, only the satisfaction of equilibrium restored. The scales had been tipped, power quietly reclaimed, and the lesson imparted without a single raised voice. In that small, control act, the reversal was complete. I had turned their arrogance into exposure, their cruelty into public acknowledgement of my worth, and the subtle revenge was infinitely sweeter for its precision and discretion. Standing on the edge of the stage once more, I felt every eye in the whole fix on me, the weight of years of neglect and dismissal pressing against my chest. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill me, studying the trembling excitement that had been coiling inside for months. I began, my voice cutting through the murmurs. For years, I worked in silence. I stayed late. I learned. I fought for opportunities no one thought I deserved. And all that time, my accomplishments were invisible to the people who were supposed to matter most. I paused, letting the words settle, letting the weight of truth sink in. The room was still, every whisper stilled by the force of my declaration. I was overlooked. I was compared. I was told I wasn't enough. But every single time I was pushed aside, I kept moving forward. I built my own path, on my own terms, and today proves that effort, resilience, and integrity can outshine favoritism, arrogance, and cruelty. My parents sat rigid, their faces pale, eyes flickering between shock, disbelief, and a dawning shame. I continued, my words now carrying a rhythm, a cadence of triumph. I didn't need your approval. I didn't need your validation. Every door you thought was closed, I opened. Every time you underestimated me, I used it as fuel. And here I stand, recognized not because of your favor, but because of my work, my persistence, and my refusal to accept the limitations you tried to impose. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, the moral scales tipping. Some classmates shifted, leaning forward, murmuring support, nodding in silent agreement. I allowed myself a small, knowing smile, letting the message settle like a stone in the hearts of those who had tried to diminish me. So yes, I added, lowering my voice slightly, but letting the sharpness linger. I am standing here today, fully seen and fully worthy. While the shadows of doubt you tried to cast on me collapse under the weight of truth, the room seemed to exhale with me, the applause swelling as my voice softened, no longer angry, but assured. My parents' shoulders slumped imperceptibly, the facade of control shattered. I had spoken my truth, laid bare the injustice, and claimed my victory not with aggression, but with the undeniable power of words, presence, and achievement. In that moment, I was not only triumphant, I was unstoppable, and the audience, peers, and even my family could feel the full force of the reversal, the justice, and the quiet but absolute reckoning that had finally arrived. The ceremony finally drew to a close, the applause fading and the crowd beginning to disperse. I lingered for a moment on the stage, letting the significance of the day settle into my bones. The rush of adrenaline had softened into a warm, steady sense of empowerment, a quiet triumph that no envelope, no whisper, and no snare could take away. My parents trailed behind, their faces still pale and uneasy, shadows of disbelief lingering like ghosts over every step they took. I felt a pang of bittersweet relief. This day had marked both an ending and a beginning. I had faced humiliation, exposure, and betrayal, yet I had emerged intact, stronger, and undeniably recognized. In the quiet moments after the crowd thinned, I replayed every memory, every slight, every subtle injustice I had endured, and felt a serene satisfaction knowing the balance had finally shifted. I realized I no longer needed their approval, their acknowledgement, or their validation to feel whole. The liberation was profound, a sense of ownership over my life that had been denied for so long. Even as I glanced back at my parents' lingering, unsettled expressions, I knew the story was mine now, mine to define, mine to live, and mine to thrive from. Every fear, every doubt, every tiny moment of self-questioning had been worth it, because this day had proven one thing undeniably: I could rise, and nothing, not even the people who tried hardest to hold me down, could stop me from becoming who I was always meant to be. As the hall emptied and the echoes of applause faded, I sat alone for a moment, letting everything settle around me. I thought about the years of favoritism, the subtle manipulations, the constant comparisons, and how each had shaped me in ways I hadn't realized until now. Yet, instead of bitterness, I felt a deep sense of resilience, or knowledge that surviving their cruelty had taught me strength, patience, and self-worth. I realized that achieving justice didn't require vengeance or malice. It required persistence, integrity, and quiet strategy. Every small effort I had made, every connection nurtured, every accomplishment achieved, became a testament to the fact that empowerment came from within, not from the fleeting approval of those who sought to diminish me. I felt empathy even for the parents who had tried to control me, understanding that their own fears and insecurities had driven their actions, yet it no longer held power over me. In this reflection, I found redemption not just for the public triumph, but for my own spirit. The emotional payoff was complete recognition, liberation, and the knowledge that I had reclaimed my narrative with grace and quiet authority. This was the moment where the past met the present, and I finally understood that surviving betrayal could become a path to genuine, lasting empowerment. Months later, I could look back on that day with a sense of calm satisfaction. My career had taken off, doors opening in ways my parents never imagined, and the recognition I had quietly earned now flourished in the public eye. I had built a life of independence, surrounded by people who value my effort and respected my achievements. The old wounds no longer ache as sharply, replaced by pride in the resilience and focus that had carried me forward. Social invitations, professional opportunities, and personal connections all reflected the truth I had known all along. I was capable, deserving, and unstoppable. Occasionally, news of my parents' continued astonishment reached me, a quiet reminder of how far the tables had turned. But I carried no malice, only the deep, satisfying knowledge that success itself had become my ultimate revenge. Each day, I thrived, not just in wealth or status, but in the confidence, respect, and self-worth that no one could take away. I was finally free, fully seen, and completely in control of my own story.